So, hello everyone. It's very exciting for me to come back to my United Way family and share a bit of what I've learned in having courageous conversations and to really give back to the organization that actually created this framework. So, I don't know if I mentioned that to Carol or Ivy, but the framework that I'm working from is actually a resource that United Way worldwide created, and I had the opportunity to adapt in the past. So, for folks who aren't familiar with me, my name is Geniro Dingle. I use he, him pronouns. Um, I am a United Way Worldwide alum and member of United Way Next. My time at United Way Worldwide started as lead associate on the diversity and inclusion team when we were still just the diversity and inclusion team. I was directly supporting Darlene Slaughter, whom many of you probably know and recognize from these calls, but also her time as the VP for diversity and inclusion at United Way Worldwide. During my time there, I was able to help the the organization in the network advance on our journey, which included the integration of equity as a core principle into the work and our evolution into the then diversity, equity, and inclusion team. Um, Left United Way Worldwide as the director for diversity, equity, and inclusion, having worked through the process of helping to change our membership standards to include diversity, equity, and inclusion as a standard, both internally and externally for United Ways. Very proud of the work that we accomplished in my time at United Way Worldwide and the growth that organizations enjoyed leading this work. I do have to, I think, maybe recognize that this work and the work that we've done is in a place where, quite frankly, it is under attack. There's no other way to um, frame it. I can only be direct with you all. And, what I'll share in that regard is a lesson I learned from both Darlene Slaughter, who was the VP for Diversity and Inclusion, and uh, uh, Marvine Hart, who was the VP for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Um, is that this work ebbs and flows. Unfortunately, it there is a pendulum swing that this work goes through where it enjoys, I think, a lot of warm embrace and resources and I think earnest support from the vast majority. And then there are moments when this work is because it pushes up against the tensions that exist within our society. Um, it ebbs and the pendulum swings the other way. We are in that swing where this work is under attack and not receiving the level of support and resources that it deserves. But I think for those of you who have been on the journey, as I recognize some of the faces here, have been on that journey with us, you recognize that it is core to what the mission of United Way is. And I believe that the staying power that this work has had and the fact that you all are taking the time to join this conversation indicates that it has staying power and importance to the work that we do. So I'll just close by saying, I've since United Way Worldwide, I went off and got a public policy degree from Georgetown, joined Greenpeace as their Greenpeace USA as their director for justice and equity, and have since transitioned into the International Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Safety team lead at Greenpeace International. Very excited to be able to lead that network's work in this regard, and I'm very excited to be here today. So, um, with that introduction of myself, that's enough about me. Let's dive into it and actually get into and get a little bit into the work. So, let me just get reacclimated with where my slides are and go ahead and Share my screen. So, of course, you all are here for a courageous conversation. Turn encourage the conversation to action. And I'm pulling from a framework that was developed at United Way Worldwide, a guide that we shared for us to use internally at UWW, but also with the network that I have no doubt probably exists somewhere out there. I don't know if United Way Online is still a thing, but if it is, it's probably there, still available for use. Yeah, this is a practical framework for dialogue. So you all are going to be a part of the conversation. And so just to give a bit of background, I think I couldn't have said it better than what I shared in regard to how DEI work is viewed currently. But I will say, in terms of difficult conversations, this is important because they are hard to avoid. For all of us who are mission driven people who are at organizations where we care about the work that we do, we are going to have challenging conversations about how to do that work, how to do it through difference, how to make sure that we're doing it in a responsive way, a responsible way, with the needs of community, of donors, of volunteers, of our peers and colleagues in mind. And so tension is going to arise. And so the thing about um, a courageous conversation is having the skill to work through that tension so that we can get to growth. What we want to avoid is fracturing or furthering the differences that we bring into the conversation, which makes it hard for us to actually accomplish what we want to do. So my hope is that by the end of this hour, you will have a better understanding of the core elements of courageous dialogue. You'll have some practice in applying them in real situations. As I said, we're going to put these things into action. We're going to do it together. And then you are going to identify one concrete shift for your team or for yourself. So, that in mind, I'm curious if folks could do a bit of a temperature check in the chat in one word or maybe an emoji. You can do an emoji as well if that's easier. Um, how do conversations about diversity and equity and inclusion usually feel in your workplace? Smiley face, that's always good. Mm, avoid it, that can be challenging, but it's quite a normal response. Invigorating. I appreciate that. That I think that aligns with what we're hoping for if we're in a good place with this work. So catching up with a few others that I saw thought provoking, yes. Yeah, tense, absolutely. Necessary. So, I just want to, start by validating that absolutely, all of what's been shared so far are within the normal range of what to expect in a workplace. You know, I would say just to, maybe offer some perspective, workplaces where these conversations are tense or avoided. Another word that one might use is challenging. That indicates to me that the organization that might be at the beginning of its journey or in the early stages of its journey around diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and then beyond DEI work, just where you know there is tension around difficult conversations overall, it may indicate something about the culture as well. The organization probably needs to start at the beginning of a cultural transformation or changing or shifting his culture. Workplaces where these things are invigorating, celebrated, thought provoking, that indicates that you're kind of at the other end of the spectrum where these are conversations where you've kind of done the groundwork. You're in the place where people are excited and actually willing to have the conversation. And that's perfectly normal as well. I think the goal is for us to have a bit of a dialogue today and to do some peer learning and see, how we can shift or move, at least within ourselves and then perhaps in teams in the organization, shift that culture. So, the courageous conversation framework. So I do want to start with some practical advice. This is at the very top of the framework as the resource. When you want to enter into a courageous conversation, one of the things that well, I should probably start by saying make sure that you sort of properly identify what the courageous conversation is about. Sometimes, so I'll give an example of probably one of the very last courageous conversations I was fortunate enough to lead at United Way Worldwide. Um, this was in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. We were hosting the network conversation. It was actually a it was actually a conversation with DEI practitioners across our network. Um, as you all may recall from that moment, the country was sort of willing, organizations were willing about how we respond to this devastating murder that we all witnessed on TV. Um, and, stuck in our homes, separated during COVID. I am and Marvine at the time had an internal conversation first to say, do we need to proceed with the work meeting that we had planned, or is it more important that we acknowledge this difficult situation, this difficult moment in history within our country's history? And do we take a bit of time with these leaders to have a courageous conversation about what we all just witnessed? I think the first thing you need to do is determine if a courageous conversation is necessary. We felt we could not proceed business as usual, and it was needed for us to discuss this, especially with this group of leaders, so that we can, I think, more earnestly, more honestly take on the work that we had before us, which was to continue to embed equity as a core principle within United Way as a network. Um, so once you've determined that a conversation is necessary, these are things you keep in mind. You frame it and you offer these as things in which people abide by when they enter into the courageous conversation. You want to set the container. So you encourage people to use I statements to speak from their own experience and not assume what the experience of others are. To minimize judgment, we want people to enter into the conversation with an open mind and a willingness to hear from others. You have to be aware of the power dynamics and how that can shift a room or the conversation. And then an encouragement to practice empathy and curiosity, being able to be attuned to the emotions of others and to engage from a place of wanting to learn and understand. So, just a bit more about understanding power dynamics. Power is not just positional, it can be racialized, genderized, institutionalized, cultural, or historical. Um, and it shapes who speaks, who is believed, and whose discomfort is prioritized. When I was teaching these these concepts at United Way, one of the things that we were very, I think, focused on is talking about how identity works. There are intersecting identities of oppression that play out within society, and we talk about it from the framework of the internal, how these things are internalized by the individual, how these play out interpersonally, so between individuals, how they play out, how they play out organizationally, so between groups of people, and then institutionally. So, I think the thing about power is that it can be positional, and so someone who has a larger role in an organization or under the current paradigms that in the of how we how intersecting identities of oppression work, who's racialized differently, the gender that you hold, the historical background that you come from. You can experience power positionally, but it also works institutionally as well. And so, being aware of how power dynamics play out, what people in the backgrounds that they have bring into a conversation, and how do you enable a space where all feel welcome, all feel open enough to share and learn is important. So I want to start with our first poll, and I'm curious, when tension rises in conversations about this work, what do you tend to do? Got almost all of our responses in so far. So far, I'm seeing a lot of folks saying that they lean in. They actually lean into these conversations. So that means when we get to the practical steps, we're going to have a very robust conversation about what people do when these things arise. So I'm glad we have some champions in the call. So almost at full participation, but I'm also seeing some folks that can tend to intellectualize. I think that is a trap that I myself fall into, which is to start to think very, in highfalutin terms about this work and what it means, and can very quickly move away from some of maybe the emotional impact of things and kind of talk about the theoretical. That's understandable. Some people withdraw. I think that's a very natural human thing to do in a difficult conversation or in a tense conversation. And then seeing a couple of responses of smooth it over. And actually, that is, that is a response that, if I could for a moment just shares, it's not the worst response actually. It depending on the situation, time and place. Sometimes when someone is experiencing a very tense moment, or they might be the sort of lightning rod for a very hard conversation, we want to intervene. One of the things that we did at United Way Worldwide and offered, I think, to the network as well was bystander intervention, smoothing things over, or or being a being using that as can be a tactic. So it's not necessarily the worst response. So I'm going to go ahead, end our poll there. Share it for folks just quickly so you can see for the about a dozen of us that are here live, where we kind of coalesce. And so again, we have a strong sort of lean in response, and I'm hoping that um that response helps us to have a strong conversation. And so I do want to, so I will maybe, while I'm uh, prefacing this, ask Ivy if you don't mind. You probably have a better read on how we can do groups of three or groups of four. So I think we can get some breakout rooms ready. But just wanted to ask you all to share in breakouts. So it'd be small groups. Well, I know we're already in a small group, so when you all come back, you could tell me how the small groups are working, and we may shift based off of that. Um, but yeah, in small groups, share one workplace conversation that was difficult. I want you to also share where did power or defensiveness show up, if it did show up, and what would courage or courageous dialogue have looked like. And then um, as a part of the sharing, for you to identify one small behavioral shift. So again, in breakouts, we're going to share one workplace conversation that was difficult. I want you to name the power dynamic or defensiveness, how it showed up, what would courageous dialogue have looked like, and then to identify one small behavioral shift. And I'm just looking at myself to do a time check. We're going to go ahead and give you all, I think, a full 6 minutes um, to have that conversation and then pull you back.
And I think because breakouts are sometimes when people leave the room, we understand if you guys have to go to the bathroom or anything like that. It looks like probably 3 breakout rooms makes the most sense. The 6 minutes should be perfect. And then I will also make sure that I copy these questions and try to put them in the chat too. So hopefully you guys have access to them that way as well.
Right.
And Maria and Nancy, if you guys have had to run off, go do something, that is totally okay. You have been assigned rooms if you want to hop into them. Otherwise, I will stay right here in case you guys need anything from me. I'm going to go ahead and start closing the rooms, and hopefully, everyone will come back into this one. And I've got 55 seconds, so some might pop in a little early. Welcome back for those of you that have started popping back in. Geniro, I'm not sure if you were talking to us, but you
Oh
are
yeah,
muted.
sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say it looks like Carol might have joined the conversation, which is good.
Yes.
Okay, and then it's a small and intimate group, so
Yep. I
see
made
how.
sure that you guys, when they did auto assign, I made sure you guys were in separate rooms, and the other one looked like it was going to be okay. So I figured I'll just stay here and welcome anyone that hops in randomly, which is exactly what happened. So it was perfect.
Good, good. So, cool. So let's do a bit of a let's do a bit of a debrief. And I'm curious to hear from folks can kind of raise their hand or come off mute and just share. You know, did any patterns emerge or anything? Uh, uh, like what did folks notice about how about the workplace moment that they shared and how it sort of played out.
Well, I heard from my folks that are still at the United Way that having um, leadership that supports you and gets behind you, it makes it easier to have those conversations. And so, um, not being in the United Way sector anymore, but having leadership that supports the conversations, it's different because when you're what I heard, the other piece that I heard was it's easier to have these conversations when we're sitting with like-minded folks.
Thank you.
I know I wasn't in any of the breakout rooms, but I love that, Tanya, you mentioned like what you were hearing, because in so many of these spaces, the practice of like listening and actually listening to understand, or listening to be curious versus listening to respond and listening to defend, makes a really big difference.
Appreciate that insight. And anyone else want to share?
Well, our group ran a little short on time, but I will follow Tanya's lead and say what I heard is that it's always interesting when leaders of the board or leaders of the organization are resistant. And so when the resistance happens, no matter what it is sometimes difficult to have a courageous conversation.
Mm. So I'm curious. So that is something that as we were um, in the implementation phase of our DEI membership standards, something that came up quite a bit when Marvine and I were talking to presidents and CEOs in particular is how to manage sort of the board dynamics. And this is where I would point back to the container for how you actually start or to build these conversations because you know courageous conversations you can use some of the skills that or some of the things that we outline in practice uh, as they arise. But usually, like for a courageous conversation, it is something that you can build into the agenda of a meeting, of a retreat, especially for board members, and be more intentional in that way. And so it was something that we worked with Alex Fike at the time with as we developing uh, uh, some of our guidance to CEOs, to leaders who help support boards and on governance is, build it into if you are having challenges with having these difficult conversations with board members. Sometimes it can arise at very challenging times when you're talking about budgeting, when you're talking about impact, when you're talking about community partnerships. And that's probably not the ideal time when you want to be having a courageous or a tense conversation. Um, I would say having, being tactical and thinking about when it's best to have these conversations. Usually it's in the onboarding phase, or there's an opportunity where you're bringing new board members in, or it's a cycle where you're having a retreat for all of the board members, where you're either reviewing the year or you're getting ready to plan out the year with the board, building it into the agenda so that it doesn't so it doesn't boil over at a critical time is important. And I want to reemphasize what I shared at the very outset of why this is important, because difficult conversations are hard to avoid. You can only avoid them for so long. And so the worst thing is to avoid them and get to a point where they are unavoidable. So I do want to maybe I'm looking at the size of our group. I'm realizing that we may be a bit more intimate than originally expected. So I think I will forego putting us back into breakouts for our next prompt, and then perhaps we can have a bit of a, you know, larger conversation, and that'll help to hear from others, and so you all aren't just hearing from me. But give me just a second to get back into my presentation so I can keep us moving. And I was catching up with Brian because it was we kind of had a one-to-one catch up, fellow UWW alum. I do have a something I didn't share in my bio is that I do have a 2-year old, and he is home from school, and I can hear him in the background. I know Zoom's noise cancellation is quite good, so you all probably don't hear him, but please excuse me if I look, if I'm kind of looking over my shoulder, wondering if he's gonna make a cameo appearance or not. Um, so yeah. I think I would say that something that I wanna notice about, at least from the couple of things that was shared, and then what I know from experience is that there are certain patterns that can arise within tense conversations, um, and these are things that you all want to keep in mind, and to work through as you are preparing for a courageous conversation or are thrust into one. So a lot of times people, you know, like silence is mistaken for agreement. And this is sort of for those of us, I heard a lot of, or not heard, in the poll, you all identified a willingness to lean into these conversations. Well, just as a reminder, silence silence from ourselves can be mistaken by others as our consent or our agreement that a dynamic that is playing out before our eyes is acceptable to us. And so, we do kind of, if we do feel confident in having courageous conversations, and we do support, the work that we do, and the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is our responsibility to kind of step up and to use the skills that we have. We I think at times when tension arises, there's this knee-jerk action to kind of shut down conversation. That I think that especially when it feels like, oh, this is not happening at the appropriate moment that we want it to. So, for example, a difficult moment or a tense moment happens within a board meeting, as one group talked about, or there's a leader who's kind of going off on some subject in a team call, or an all staff call. There can be a, a, a rush to move on. These are those moments where we can actually lean in, use some of the skills that we have to encourage a difficult conversation. I would say you kind of have to know the dynamic of the individual as well as the room to think tactfully for how you can sort of negotiate that dynamic. Sometimes there's a rush to focus on the intent of a person. They've said something very harsh, or they've sort of made an offhand remark. You notice that there's an impact on the individual, but instead of attending to that individual in the way they were impacted by a racist, a sexist, a ableist, um, uh, you know, a, a terrible remark about a community partner or a community member or a group of individuals, um, a overly harsh comment about someone's work, that's not true, it wasn't done in a collegial way or fashion. There's a rush to focus on the intent. Oh, well, they were just saying that so you can do a better job. Well, they were just saying that because we think we can have a better impact on community. They were just saying, we focused on the intent instead of the impact, and what the impact on the individual or the groups of people who may have been hurt uh, by that comment was. And then sometimes there could be an over reliance on, well, everything I've said is factual. We're going to stick to the data. Yes, like I think to avoid the fact that we are emotional creatures and emotions do matter, and how we attend to them is important in how we do the work that we do. So these are some patterns to notice in difficult conversations and to attend to. Um, so for courageous conversations, again, I've kind of mentioned it as building the container or having a structure for yourself. I started by stating that need to have some norms in place, using I statements, speaking from your own personal experience, um, you know, uh, encouraging empathy and curiosity. Um, but you also need to have some other, I think, practical things defined as well, especially if you're having a courageous conversation. Again, I'll use the board conversation as an example. Sometimes you're facilitating a courageous conversation and there is a clear decision that needs to be made at the end of the conversation. So having a defined decision-making process, in these conversations, you might not reach full consensus. You need to state at the top that the norm is going to be majority rules. This is a practice so that, everyone goes into the conversation understanding that we have to make this decision. This is the process to get to the decision, and we are going to live with the outcome of that decision. I think that you have to set yourself up for success in that way. Making sure that you have shared language for name and impact. The silly thing we did back in the day was say oops or ouch when there's a difficult thing that kind of arises in the conversation, but it doesn't have to be as silly as that. It could be very direct. And for something that I do on my team currently at Greenpeace is that we have the team norm of we are going to address things directly with one another. So I'm leaning into our team norm for direct communication. And I name it that way. Not a silly way to say it at all, but it's a very clear way to say, we're going to we might be having a tense conversation at the moment, but I'm going to lean into this shared norm that we've accepted as the way we communicate as a team. And then equitable meeting design, making sure that, again, this was something that was especially important uh, uh, when we were developing this guide or redeveloping this guide, is that we thought of you know the different considerations for what allows a person to be in the meeting, and to use that space to its full potential. Like, have you designed the meeting at a time that um, you know, aligns with when everyone can meet and actually have their focus on the content. So many times people plan courageous conversations, or they plan a difficult or a tense conversation at a time when everyone can actually be a part of the conversation. So you've excluded people. That's not an equitable way to design meetings, or they design it to one individual's calendar. So we're going to pick the time that works best for the CEO because they're so busy. That's not an equitable way to think about it. I think that, again, this kind of goes back into and feeds into notice and power dynamics, and how they show up. If we're always at the behest of the leader, that's not an actual very equitable way to kind of design or norm. It's not an equitable norm within an organization to always be at the behest of one individual over the majority. So make sure you're doing the practical things to kind of set up success in these conversations. Um, so I want to move us into another exercise, and perhaps we can, yeah, I originally imagined this as pairs. I'm curious if I can get a thumbs up or some affirmation in the chat. Would folks rather? Because I think we can maybe we can popcorn and maybe share out. But would folks rather do this action in pairs, or would we rather stay in the large room and perhaps just have a bit of a open conversation about it? Um, I'm not seeing a strong response either way. Let me look in the chat. So
It
I'm
will
seeing,
be
so
like
okay,
large
large room. Let's
room.
stay here in the large room. Okay,
Yep.
let's stay in the large room. So, so I guess the question on the table is, and so we'll start with someone has to offer up. So this is we're in the large room. Got to be that brave person. Where does difficult where do difficult conversations show up in your team? We need someone to give us a place, and then we will source as a community what what can be done to maybe shift. So this will um, just for clarity, we're not doing pairs anymore. The question on the table is where do difficult conversations show up on the team? We're looking for one person to give us an example, and then as a large group, we're going to give that person who's offered us an example some practical. We're going to source it from all of us. Um, Things that we think they could do to work through the example they gave us.
Um, Hello. Let me put my camera on. I'm like talking without it. Okay. Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Um,
Makila.
my name is Makila. So I think that difficult conversations can show up. And I don't know if you are looking more for like a scenario, but I think when there's like a misunderstanding of like, or there's not like roles assigned, I'm thinking about like a mocha. So like if you have a project that you're doing and the roles are not like outlined of who's going to be doing what, and there could be some misunderstandings there. Um, so maybe you accidentally step on someone's toes or you duplicate work or, there's so much that can happen within that. And I think difficult conversations can show up to like address you're supposed to be doing this and I'm supposed to be doing this and we have, deadlines that we need to meet. So I don't know if that's coming out right, if I'm saying it
So,
correctly.
so you kind of did the whole example for us.
Oh,
Which is fine. This is fine. Makila offered up is where do difficult conversations show up? So they show up when um uh there aren't clear roles, right? So this is where difficult conversations show up. And so what I can imagine, I'm gonna fill in a little bit about what can happen is, someone says on the team to the leader of the team, "Hey, this person's duplicating my work," or they didn't get my sign off on this aspect of the work. You haven't made it clear of like how we're sharing out the responsibilities in the a structural shift that Makila identified for us is to use a mocha. This is just very. If, for folks, Makila, maybe you could offer for folks who aren't familiar with the mocha system what it is in terms uh, of design or how to of organizational practice.
yeah. So mocha is like so I'm gonna add to this too. Like,
Okay.
what if the people aren't following the mocha? So that's another
Ooh.
thing. So, but what mocha is like just how you so you have an M, I think is manager, O might be the organizer, C is the consultant, H is helper, and then A is approver. So each person has a role that they should be doing. And so like I'm going to go to the manager who's like running the project, and we're going to go to the approver after all of the consultants have and helpers have done their work. So it kind of helps to outline how you are going to approach the project. And it's not, yeah, I have to I'm going to pull up a link so it just tells a little bit more about it. But
Yep.
if folks aren't
Absolutely.
using the mocha, that is difficult conversation too. That's just
Yeah.
adding on to that.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. So maybe to to respond to like, okay, so you that is organizational practice that you all are instituted, but they're not following it, right? So this actually goes back to maybe one of the first things I shared, which is when to identify if a courageous conversation is needed. So in the example that I use, like this is a post George Floyd moment. This is immediate moments afterward. We identified it as a courageous conversation, and we were clear in saying that, hey, this is a courageous conversation that we're having. I will say that, sometimes when you say courageous conversation, it carries a certain emotional weight. And I would even encourage that you don't always have to name every conversation where you're going to use some of these skills as a courageous conversation because it's for some people it can sort of denote that it's a heavier emotional conversation than what it really is. But the skills and how you frame it, how you shape it, they all still apply. So for Keela's example, I would say you don't have to name it as a courageous conversation. It could just be how you intend to go into this team call. Folks aren't using Mocha. I am the leader saying like, hey, I want to, have a quick team check-in about using this organizational practice. And you set the container with all of the team norms that you all may have likely already created, or you set team norms if you haven't already created them. You share what the agenda is and what it is that you're going to talk about. You frame it in a way where people are able to share what tensions or challenges they are experiencing. But again, remember what we talked about, sort of setting up the structure of it. You are facilitating this conversation to maybe not a decision point, but to an outcome. The intended outcome is for folks um, to again buy into use of Mocha as the way in which you all define work within the organization. So that's what you're facilitating towards. I hope that kind of answers like, okay, so yeah, you know, yeah, the Mocha is a is an example of maybe a way to kind of deal with this tense moment, but also you kind of have to have that conversation first or identify it as a need. So I'm realizing as usual, despite my best efforts, I have been quite verbose. And we're getting close to that hour mark, and I wanna keep us moving so that I can allow us to do some of the housekeeping things that Ivy and Carol likely have in mind for us. Um, I have to say that it's been exciting for me to be back in front of a United Way audience. And it's one thing that we always ended these sort of conversations on, especially making them practical for folks. I hope that I have imparted something of interest, some level of insight that you maybe heard from others in the breakout or in this one example we were able to get to with Makila. Um, Something that you can take away. So I'm hoping that folks can either throw into the chat or you can write it down for yourself. If you feel more comfortable that way, one specific behavior, practice, perhaps a reflection, or yeah, no, the specific behavior or practice that you want to take away from this that, you will use the next time a difficult conversation arises.
I do have one question to go back to something that was said earlier, Geniro, that kind of is
Sure.
on the top of my mind. I'm one of the people who said I like to smooth things over when tensions rise.
Yeah.
And I think it's more to kind of like bring the temperature down so that we can maybe
Yes.
reset and get productive again. But I
Yes.
also wanted to think about how to make that even more effective. I don't know that I'd like to be more of that, move towards being more of a leaner inner when it's appropriate.
Yeah.
And there's ways to make that shift. So yeah.
Do you have an example or do you have a
Mm.
situation that you could think of where you've had to employ that smoothing over tactic?
I just think it's a role I naturally gravitate towards when I'm with my
Yeah.
family and my friends and when I'm trying to, I can't think of one at work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other piece of it that I wanted to just raise with you, it's so interesting to see the cultural change, the internal cultural at UWW to shift. Sorry for the folks who aren't at UWW, but It's been interesting to see the shift from over, and I don't want to make it sound like our current leaders aren't don't take the same approach to DEI, but there is I think it's to some extent reflecting some of the culture we're having to deal with in our country. And so it's interesting to see how it's changed, and it makes me a little sad actually, but I'm hoping that
No,
we'll get back to being more direct and in all of this. So yeah,
yeah,
that's just my hope. So yeah.
no. So again, shared, Marvine especially always emphasized that pendulum sort of swing
Yeah.
and cheat. I'm sure Jenny has shared like United Way is not immune. We always talk
Right.
about like United Way, is very much a part of this country and the fabric of this country and can shift in those ways. And certainly, UWW isn't immune either. And
Yeah.
so I'll say in terms of wanting to smooth it over, as it is a tactic,
Yeah.
especially when I employ it when I feel as though an individual is being a lightning rod, and it and or for you know uh being sometimes you call it call out culture, or to kind of being made the pariah of a team, and so as a ally you can use it as to kind of divert, and we talk about it in the bystander intervention training in that regard. But when it shows up and it makes the work difficult, I think smoothing it over is again is like I guess I'm just validating it is a useful tactic,
Hmm.
especially when you said you use it to be productive. When they're like, again, if you are in a meeting and the purpose of the meeting hinges on a decision point, it's a very practical thing to say. I have to smooth this over so we can walk away with the objective that we
Yeah.
have. I
Can I
think,
suggest something?
yeah,
Yes, please.
absolutely.
And also, I've been teaching community leadership for the past 15 years. I think also when we enter conversations like this, really think about ourselves as those who serve. And
Hmm.
so, in that sense, those who learn from the experience. I always believe in those experiences. You talk about smooth things over, also make it a learning opportunity
Mm.
that people walk away with something that is not just conversation and we all back into our corners. I think as community leaders, we should also help folks gain knowledge, help folks understand what they just went through. Um, if we want to change the culture, for us to think about how we walk into those situations and how we help um, folks grow from it.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Um, yeah, so again, I know we're at or getting close to my time, my full hour, so I did want to get us to maybe a bit of reflection. And I would say because we are at time, I'll say you can share, you can again maybe make a note to yourself, maybe share in the chat just something that you didn't know, or maybe something you relearned in the course of this conversation. A reminder that discomfort is not failure. The inability to act in all situations, or the inability to act in all situations, is not an indication of what kind of person you are. It is, I'll just use the I statement. I have been in many a room where it's been difficult, even though I've been trained in bystander intervention, even though I attend and regularly lead conversations around DEI, where, my courage has failed me. And I think quite often about those, and I don't take it as an indictment on myself. I remind myself that we are all human and flawed. Um, but I do use it to remind myself, to fuel me to find my courage. There are teammates, there are colleagues, there are community members that are dependent on us finding our courage and to harness it in these moments, to be allies, to be co-conspirators when it is necessary. So that, don't sit in the discomfort of feeling as though I didn't execute something, perfectly every single time, but just take courage in the fact that you can and you have, and you can find that courage again. And yeah, I think when there are difficult conversations that are happening, when there are tense conversations, when there are courageous conversations that have been had, it signals that there's something real being surfaced. You are talking about the difficult work of the organizations that you are a part of the community that you are a part of. um, you know, and even if it doesn't feel core to, and it really is like, a difficult conversation that surfaces out of some tragic moment or someone's own personal failing, that it can start a very real conversation about a serious topic, and it's necessary to having a resilient, strong culture that organizations like United Ways, like the organizations you all are part of, have. So I'll leave you with that. I'll make sure that if I didn't share it already in my meeting submission to to uh, Ivy and United Way Next, the framework. It is available for folks who are at United and still have access to United Way online. I am certain it is still there, but I will share it again because I did keep a copy for myself because it is a useful resource. And you can find me at email. You can find me on LinkedIn if you all don't already have me there. I'm happy to connect. Happy to be a resource. A reminder that, again, for our UWW folks, or for our United Way folks, or anyone who might be watching the recording of this, that there's tons of internal resources that I'm sure still exist. There are tons of external resources that I can point you to if you all are looking for them, and I'm happy to connect uh, uh, in LinkedIn, email. If you all want to have a conversation with me, reach out. This is a community that means so much to me. If I can, just as a personal reflection, United Way helped raise me as a professional, and I'm proud of the work that I did there. Is a reason why I am a United Way Next member. And this has been hopefully the first of many conversations I get to give back to a movement, as Marvine always reminded me, that has given so much to me. So thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so much.
Geniro. Yeah, I think we're both like Ivy and I are both so thrilled that you were here today. So Ivy, I'll let you talk first and then I'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so I was just going to say I wanted to give Genaro as much time as possible, because there have been so many golden nuggets, and if anyone has questions, I want to make sure that he still has time to answer them. So I was going to be super brief if I could be. I wanted to point out that I will actually be hosting our next community roundtable on designing and delivering accessible presentations, and then there will be another one in August and one in November. I'll make sure that all of those links are in the follow-up email, and I also will make sure that all of the DEI stuff in United Way Online is also linked in that as well. And if you are a United Way Next member, you do not have to be working at a United Way actively to still have access to United Way Online and the Global Digest. So if you are a member, you will still be able to have an account, sign in, look through all of the resources, all of the things. Genero, if you do have any additional external resources, feel free to send them. I will happily share them. And I will also include them in our future resource library that we are building out at the moment. And then I just wanted to mention, when you do hop off of here, there will be a 3-question survey just to let us know how we are doing, if there's anything we could have done better at this event, if there's other topics that you want to hear about. And then I just want to give a quick shout out to obviously Genero, but then as well as our event programming sponsors, Third Sector Company, Front Stream, and Board Build. So, Genero, Carol, if you guys have closing thoughts, there is still, I believe, 7 minutes for questions.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to Geniro. What a great, presentation. It was really a great reminder. There were several comments from people who may have had to step off. What a, inspiring moment to sit together in community. And that's what these roundtables are all about. We really want you to feel that you can come here. It's a safe space. It's a place that, people who are listening to this afterwards, I'm sure are going to regret they weren't physically here in person today to witness us on this virtual screen. But we're super excited to look forward to the future roundtables that we'll be hosting this year and having Ivy and others speak. So we have a few minutes. If there are any specific questions that anyone wanted to ask, or even just a comment from your experience today. Well, I'm going to just share that it was a gentle reminder to me, and I hope Ivy feels the same way, that within United Way Next, our board and our staff are very committed to this work. And despite all that's happened in the last year or so, we haven't abandoned it. We've actually embraced it. And that's why we continue to offer these community roundtables intentionally, so that anyone who feels they don't have anywhere else to go, that you can come here. So pass that along to other people that you're connected to that are either United Way professionals that are interested in maybe getting involved with United Way Next, that this would be a place for them to feel comfortable joining. And within the network, of course, we're always welcoming local United Ways to be a part of United Way Next and their staff to engage and be a part of this. So I know Holly and Nancy are both, and Nancy Pinto are all in the network. I'm not sure about Maria. But we really want to open it up. And then for our alumni and retirees who are participating today, that they also know it's maybe in your workplace, but it's also when you're volunteering as a retiree in another nonprofit or organization that could benefit from some of this. So the recordings are always available on our website and can be shared. There's a playlist of all of our past DEIB roundtables. So that can be shared also as a resource within your own network. So we would encourage that. And with that, I mean, I didn't hear anybody say anything. So if you've got something you want to share, the time is now. And if not, we've got 4 more minutes we can give back in your day. And so it was great to see everybody. Nancy, I see you're unmuted, so maybe you'll.
Yeah, so as I shared before, I'm very relatively new to the United Way space. And when I was looking on United Way Worldwide, I did not see any training or any conversation or anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I was specifically looking for it. And so when this popped up and it had those words in the title, I knew that I was going to, and I had no idea what United Way Next was. Again, not a clue. But because I saw that it was labeled as a diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, and that's something that is important in my life, I found the way, to get connected to this. And so thank you for welcoming someone to the space who has no clue what all of these United Way things are. But what I'm seeing is that in the United Way network, it doesn't, I think people are having a hard time trying to figure out how to navigate given the political climate.
Yeah.
And not using the words but still doing the work, but not using the words. And so part of me then is, well, what does that say to people that we're working with and to people that in communities that we're serving, if we're not going to actually say the words, but we're going to do the work? And how does that devolve into distrust, and all of that? So I struggle with a lot of these. I'm struggling a lot with everything that's going on. And literally we're having the same conversation as I sit on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission for the county, and whether or not we should change the name of our group and how do we do the work and, all of that. So thank you for saying the words and then providing the space for an initial conversation.
See, real quick, I've got some resources that I will happily share with you. There is actually a new employee zone in United Way Online for anyone that is new to the network, so that might help tremendously already. And then I also have a couple of landing pages that I will include in my follow-up email of all of the DEI resources in United Way online. They've got landing pages, even archived stuff that they used to be using, and probably some of the stuff that Geniro has touched, and I will include all of that. But they have also recently put out it's navigating like everything that's going on right now. It is a resource for that, and then there is also, I'm trying to get you the actual names, but it is navigating the changing landscape, anti-DEI legislation in nonprofit operations. They've got a resource for that, and a resource for executive orders affecting charitable nonprofits, as well as the new United Way DEI operational guide. And I believe that there's some other resources in there. So I will make sure that all of that is linked and available in the follow-up. So if anyone else is also struggling with having those conversations or trying to find resources, hopefully that will help.
So, not to monopolize the time, but one of the things that I was looking for in the archives was the 21-day challenge that United Way had put together and put out a number of years ago. And Genaro, I see you're nodding your head.
Yeah.
That I could not find. Um,
Yeah, I would say, oh man. Well, I don't know where or if it might exist still. And Brian laughing because he helped internally help communicate that that challenge a lot. It's a like I know it may be archived somewhere on United Way online.
if
So
someone if someone
yeah.
can find that and find that link for me and include that, Ivy, I would really, really appreciate that. Yes, because that I did that challenge years ago when it came out, and yeah. Anyway,
I would say the network, many United Ways still run them. I have to say, I've still seen them pop up now and again. So I would not be, but then
okay.
also, maybe I'll share with Ivy if I can't find it quickly. But Interaction Institute for Social Change, they are our partners who helped actually us build our challenge, and so I know um, they still they still run, and it's a more up to date. Okay, so I found it. So I'm going to just throw it in the chat really quickly because it is
I
a
found something as well, because that was done kind of, Nancy, all over the country. So,
Right.
like United Way of Illinois, which was the state association, launched an equity challenge, and the United Ways there could take advantage of it, but it was a spin-off of whatever was done at Worldwide. So, there's got to be a lot of those out there on the internet that didn't go away. But if
yeah.
you do need a direct contact at a United Way that did the equity challenge, that you feel it would be valuable for you to use that, I can make some introductions to peers across the network that I think could still support or assist you with it, assuming they still have the materials and all the good things that were part of that. So, and
I
Genero found something, so that's also in the link, linked in here too.
Yep, I am gonna steal the links from the chat. I also did see that the link that you probably found in World United Way Online was broken, so I did do some sleuthing as well and found a couple other resources. There's some PDFs, some web pages, things like that. I will make sure that those are available, and I will see if I can send a quick note to whoever manages that page, because it usually says at the bottom like who works on the pages, and I'll just let them know that it's broken.
Thank you. I'll stop now.
Yeah, and if I could have maybe just a final comment, just to share that, like this work is under attack. It's no doubt about it. Politically, legislatively, through executive order. Um, but I think the importance of it in how it relates to our work at United Way, it has not changed. It has not gone away. And I think like I'm very mindful that organizations, especially United Ways, have a relationship, especially with the federal government, and probably feel quite constrained about what it is that they can and can't do. Um, you know, I'm not I am not ignorant to the fact that, it is a challenging and very difficult conversation to have internally about how do we respond to the current cultural moment we are in, when we want to do great work for our communities. And so, I think, I encourage folks to ask the difficult questions in the organizations, to have those hard conversations, to lean into them. You may have found that, I think like most organizations, the tactic, unfortunately, but which is understandable, is to be a bit more subversive at the moment, to stay out of the ire of the federal government and to have that crashing down on you. But I also to give credence to the people who are brave and defiant and say, we aren't going to change tactic and turn tail because of the attacks on this work. We view it as core to who we are, and what we do. And so, I can understand the very difficult choices that leaders have to make under the current paradigm. I'm encouraging that folks to lean into those conversations. And then I will say that just because our organizations may be making decisions or have to conduct themselves in a certain way, I would encourage you all, if these are things or concepts that are important to you personally, that you voice that. And that is maybe more important in the political moment that we find ourselves in. The courage of us as citizens to say, this is important to us. We think it should be on the table. And sometimes, and I think this is where we found ourselves, that allows organizations to be more courageous. So I'll leave you with that final thought, and really thankful to have been here and in conversation with you.